Hello everyone, and welcome to our talk here and now. It's a slightly different talk. You know that it's said that a picture paints 1,000 words, except we can't show you any pictures. So I've got about 10 pictures. That must be about 10,000 words that I need in order to adequately describe what you would see if we didn't have a bit of a technical problem at the moment. But what we can do is, if anyone does want to get a copy of the presentation and go through it at their leisure, then we can do that. Just contact us using the contact details which will be displayed. So, what can we do in the meanwhile is basically, this is a talk I've given before where I called it the Proof of the Truth. That was a title that was given to me. And that asks a few more questions, and it's questions for believers, those who are here that are Christians, and anyone else it applies to. How do we prove the message of the Bible? Either to ourselves or to an interested friend. How do we prove the message of the Bible? Now, I would suggest that you're unlikely to convince someone whose mind is already made up. You might be beating your head against a brick wall. There's a very colourful phrase in the Bible, isn't there? You're casting pearls before swine. Not that I'm calling all my friends swine. Only a few of them are. There are people who don't want to believe the Bible, because if they believed it, they'd have to do something about it. And that for them might mean quite a change in their lives, so they don't want to know. Now, different people will respond to different evidence. What floats somebody's boat might not float someone else's. And what kind of proof could we offer anyway? Well, I would suggest it's useful to turn to scriptures, which I'm not doing all that often this evening. But here's Hebrews 11, verse 1 says, "Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." So nobody is going to find enough proof and enough evidence to be totally, completely and utterly convinced without faith. Faith makes up that gap between what you can see and what is not seen. Now, I could, and am, looking at historical and archaeological evidence. You could appeal to people's, or the sense of logic in the Bible, or at least the fact that it is more logical than the alternatives. You can look at creation, nature, and see evidence of design, and that might convince somebody to think, well, how did all this happen by random chance? You can turn into the Bible, particularly, for example, Daniel, and you can look for prophecy. And you can show that the Bible predicted the empires that are described in Daniel, for example, or the restoration of Israel. There's various things that were prophesied that have come true, which again may convince somebody. There are contemporary accounts. Josephus, for one example, people who were writing at the time of the first century, again, to show that it's not just all made up in this book. There's other factors. Other people will tell us that Jesus was a historical figure and that these events happened. There's the internal Bible consistency that might appeal to some. They can see how consistent these golden threads are, even though it's, many different authors, 66 different books, and yet the same threads go through all of it. This is a principle I think is useful to take into consideration, and it's Luke 16, verse 10, that says, "He who is faithful in very little thing is faithful also in much," which, if we think, in terms of what we're trying to achieve, if we can prove something, a small thing, then perhaps people can think, well, if it's true about that, then it must be true about the rest. If we can show and convince somebody who is faithful in a very little thing, then maybe they will take that leap of faith and believe in all of it. What did it for me? What convinced me of the truth of the Bible? And it was another book, a book that convinced me about a book. And it was called The Bible as History. And it was by a gentleman called Werner Keller, who's not particularly devout. He was more an investigative journalist type of person. And on the cover of it, it says, "Archaeology and Science Adventure 4,000 years into the past to document the Bible as history, a confirmation of the book of books." And as it says, it shows the Bible as history. And it is a fact that archaeologists who work in Israel now do refer to the Bible to find out where things are going to be. They regard the Bible as an accurate historical document. Examples, and this is where I'm going to do my best to describe the photos to you. One is the Pool of Siloam, which is in Jerusalem, and it is mentioned in various places, but particularly there's the account of Jesus encountering a cripple there who was trying to get into the water, because the superstition was that when the waters moved, people would be healed. That's a real place that can be visited and seen to this day for anyone. There's the Mesha stele, the Moabite stone as it's also known. I shall have to refer to my notes now because I can't remember all of it. It's basically a stone tablet discovered in 1868. It contains a 34-line inscription in the Moabite language commemorating the military and building activities of Mesha, king of Moab, around 840 BC, and describing Mesha's victory over ancient Israel. So straight away, we can go to the Bible and we can read all about the king of Moab, but here you can go to this stone, the Moabite stone, and read about the king of Israel. Again, more proof that it was a real place, a real people, a real king. And in passing, you can also note the fact that this inscription contains what's called the Tetragrammaton, which is God's name in Hebrew. And that's just 4 letters, tetra, 4, grammaton, letters, 4 letters that give us Yahweh, the name of God. So that's in the stone as well. There's a place called Lachish, best known for its siege and conquest by the Neo-Assyrian Empire in about 700 BC, an event famously depicted on the Lachish reliefs, which can be seen today in the British Museum. And according to the book of Jeremiah, Lachish and Azekah were the last two Judean cities to fall to the Neo-Babylonian Empire before the conquest of Jerusalem. And that's according to Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 7. Again, these documents written in ancient Israeli or Israel, found at Lachish, again, further proof of the biblical accuracy. Then one that people will have heard of, the Dead Sea Scrolls, a set of ancient Jewish manuscripts from the Second Temple period. They were found between 1946 and 56 at the Qumran Caves, which is on the West Bank, northern shore of the Dead Sea. I'm not sure who is controlling that area at this particular moment, but they included entire books of the Bible, like Isaiah, as one example. So again, shows the accuracy of the translations, the consistency of the translation, that even these dated from as much as 300 BC, they had the same in it as we have today. There's a place in Israel called Tel Dan. Tel means a hill. A beautiful mound in northern Galilee. I don't know how a mound is beautiful, but that's what it says. It's at the foot of Mount Hermon, beside one of the headwaters of the Jordan River. They found there a remarkable inscription from the 9th century BC that refers both to the house of David and the King of Israel. And this is the first time that the name David has been found in any ancient inscription outside the Bible. The inscription refers not simply to David, any old David, but to the house of David, the dynasty of the great Israelite king. Another confirmation of what the Bible tells us. In Numbers chapter 6, verses 22 to 7, the priests are instructed to bless the people of Israel with a 3-part blessing known as the priestly blessing, or priestly benediction if you want. The words of this blessing appear on 2 small silver amulets discovered in the Hinnom Valley, south of Jerusalem's old city. The amulets date for around 600 BC, hundreds of years before the oldest known copy of any biblical manuscript. But again, the same words that appear in our Bible, albeit ours are in English, but it's the same as what was put on these silver amulets, whatever it is now, 2,600 years ago. We talked about the Pool of Siloam earlier. There is something called Hezekiah's Tunnel, which links this to the pool to a spring. And the idea of it was to get water into the city, especially during a siege or so on. One of the greatest waterworks of the ancient world. Hezekiah's tunnel was carved to bring water from one side of the city of Jerusalem to the other. Now, people who are interested in railways, I don't know if there is anyone here possibly even remotely interested in railways, will know about how tunnels are constructed and different methods. And with Hezekiah's tunnel, they started, the workmen, from both ends, and met in the middle, which is pretty impressive considering, we're not talking about people on walkie-talkies or cell phones, not people with really sophisticated measuring implements and tools and so forth. But nevertheless, they managed it, and the water flowed. And it's, again, you can walk through it if you want to go to Jerusalem and get your feet wet. You can. Further proof of what the Bible says is true. This is one, especially the kiddies love this one. It's about crucifixion, which is not a very nice subject, but nevertheless. In 1968, the archaeologists found a Second Temple rock-cut tomb, which is roughly Second Temple corresponding to around the time of Christ. The tomb had the name Jehoan, son of Ezekiel. Inside were the bones of an adult male in his mid-20s, and in the right heel bone of the adult male was a 4.5-inch nail driven from the exterior side through the bone. A fragment of an olive wood board was located between the head of the nail and the bone, and the tip of the nail was bent into a curve. So what? Well, it proves crucifixion. It proves that Jews were crucified. And this particular one had a proper, even a wealthy burial. And we remember, if we know our Bibles, that Jesus was basically put into the tomb of a very rich man. I'm not saying this for a minute that this is the bone of Jesus. I don't want to start some Catholic cult, worshipping this bone. It's an example, but it shows that these things that were talked about with Jesus happened with people historically. It can be seen. So, using my vivid descriptive skills, hopefully we've considered some of the many archaeological finds. Now, the fact is that you can go to Israel with a spade and pretty much dig it into any hill, any mound, and you'll find something. The area is absolutely teeming with archaeological finds. So, this is only a very small section. Some of it you can see in the British Museum. Some of it you would have to go to Israel to see. And as I said before, if you want a copy of the presentation with all the pictures, then that can be arranged if you contact us. So let's just go back to the beginning, what I said to start with. People could have looked at that. You could be one of those people out there in Zoom land, totally unconvinced by that. So what? We can't convince everyone, especially if their mind is already made up. And as we say, different people will respond to different evidence. You might be enthralled by archaeology. You might be bored rigid about archaeology, but maybe the prophecy fulfillment will float your boat. I don't know. There's many avenues to pursue if you're interested, if you want to be a searcher after the truth. And as I say, what convinced me, my book by Werner Keller and the examples that he gave, which set my mind racing and my interest in the Bible archaeology. That convinced me, but something else might convince you. We don't know. But with that scripture from Luke 16, verse 10, I'll finish. It says, "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much." Which means that if there was something there amongst those examples that you think, well, that's, like the fact that David is actually written about in the other inscriptions and so forth. If that has convinced you of a little thing, then perhaps it's worth exploring further into the Bible and see if you can believe more. And eventually, maybe, all of it. I don't know. So, apologies that it was a rather unusual talk, the illustrated talk. But once more, as I say, if you contact us, be happy to send on a copy of the presentation so that you can look at the pictures, or you can look over those places and those artifacts. You look them up online, you'll find them, and you can read for yourself all the evidence that there is in archaeology for the accuracy of the Bible. Thank you very much for listening.